Welcome to Microdose Psychedelic Insights, powered by the Conscious Fund. This is the Incognito series, casual psychedelic conversations on cognitive liberty.
Cody, welcome. It's Cody number 2, my second guest on Incognito. And things are already going smoother because I've actually introduced the podcast here. Last time I just started and ripped right into it. It was great. 10 minutes in, I was like, oh, maybe I should mention what this is. Cody, why don't you introduce yourself and tell everyone a little bit about what you do?
Fantastic. Well, first off, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. I am the Director of Business Development at Ambria Capital. We are, I guess you'd call an alternative investment fund, pretty much invest into emerging public and private companies in the healthcare, agricultural, consumer, and tech space. Currently, I want to say we have probably about 40 or 50 deals under the portfolio. It was launched with 2 of the partners from our last fund. 2015-16, we started investing into cannabis really heavily. And in 2017, actually through a podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience, I got to listen to Dennis McKenna, obviously, as we all know, kind of explain, I guess you could call it really the overall psychedelic space. It's a very interesting lens that he kind of looks through, obviously with who his brother is. And just kind of, I went down the wormhole, man. I started reading pretty much everything I could get my hand on. I would say probably towards 2018, 2019, I expanded a little bit past the mushroom space and started looking at some of the other, I guess you call them compounds in the space, DMT. I read The Spirit Molecule by Dr. Strassman, the LSD studies from the 40s, 50s, and 60s before Prohibition really cracked down on everything. And it was incredible the amount of information that was, number one, hidden from everybody, and number 2, just kind of thrown on the back burner. I mean, one of the most interesting things I think today is really the disease of despair is just so widespread throughout the world. I mean, the United States, especially where I'm located, it's, alcoholism, depression. We've had, never-ending wars. The Middle East, it's been 25 straight 30 years of us being over there. So you're seeing tens of thousands of people return home with PTSD. One of my best friends from school actually lost his arm and his leg over in Afghanistan. So, seeing kind of some of the different opportunities for therapy that were available, it kind of seemed like, it was a natural progression coming over from the cannabis space, kind of what our expectations really were from a medicine standpoint. It seems like the shift kind of happened where the recreation side became the main focus of the industry, where I think psychedelics, there's a much more in-depth kind of medicinal purpose. And I think you're starting to see that with, Compass and the, obviously the wide variety of companies that are out there currently. So currently here, I wear a lot of different hats. I guess you could kind of say I manage our due diligence and market assessment projects. So, the building, maintaining of relationships with clients, partners, all that good stuff. Wherever I can kind of fit in, that's kind of like where I slide in at. So, and doing things like this obviously helps tremendously.
Talking to idiots like me.
I don't know, man. I think that you kind of took over the space a little bit. I don't think there's anything really that's comparable to what you're doing right now. So
I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, glad to be leading that way with you.
We're happy to be working with a lot of the industry here, and hopefully there's a lot more to come. We've got some cool product releases coming over the next couple months, so really excited for that. So while we're talking about psychedelics, the format is kind of 10-10-10. I'm going to start asking a question regularly on this, and it's, what is your favorite psychedelic and why? It doesn't have to be personal consumption, but even just generally what. So
it's a complicated question. I've actually been asked this a lot over the last 12 months, and I've kind of noticed my answer has evolved the more in-depth into the space that we get. I'm probably going to have to say psilocybin, just because of the multi-layered approach that it seems like the industry is having with it. I guess from a medicinal standpoint, again, getting back to the PTSD stuff, and I really truly think that the benefits from a psychological standpoint, once the therapists are in place and there's clinics set up across the country and in Canada and kind of what you're seeing in Mexico and Jamaica and things like that, I think you're going to see a mental health revolution. You kind of hear the guys at Compass talk about it. Healthcare is looked at so differently here in the States than it is in Europe. So from the medicine standpoint, and then I guess really from the, the spiritual standpoint, as I've gotten deeper into the industry, like I said, over the last 2 years here, it's really been incredible to see the amount of people that have, changed their whole outlook on life. Let alone from the medical standpoint, whether you want to talk about the shamans giving the experiences, or, you look at some of the Indian reservations in the Southwest United States that have kind of been doing this, for the last 20 years. And I guess even from the recreational standpoint, you see a lot of people now that are going on vacation specifically for, access to psychedelics. So I guess from an overall industry standpoint, I would have to say psilocybin.
For sure. Yeah. And it seems to be really one of the compounds that's, leading the charge for decrim or, legalization worldwide. You see what just happened recently with Therasil being granted exemptions for end-of-life palliative care patients. So I would have to agree. I think my favorite's acid, but mushrooms are definitely leading the charge there.
I read a great book called Chaos. It was
Oh.
about some of the CIA's LSD experiments in the 60s. Highly recommended if
give us a TLDR, entice the audience into reading this book.
So again, all speculative here, but apparently the CIA had these programs built in Southern California and also Central Northern California where they were dosing, everybody imaginable. Regular random Joes off the street, scientists that worked for the Army. Everything. It was really incredible to see, and kind of some of the fallout that occurred and some of the things that were slipped through the cracks because of the designation of acid and the government not wanting any connection to it. It's really, really, really incredible. Highly recommended read. And it ties in the Charles Manson murders a little bit in Southern California and how this guy was able to slip through the criminal justice system.
Wild.
Because possibly the CIA was providing him with acid. It's kind of funny that a homeless, repeat criminal, drug addict was able to, number one, get these large amounts of LSD, and number two, the government was doing some of these same mind control experiments that he was doing on his family. So where did that information come from? Where did that knowledge come from? Really interesting, man. Highly recommended read.
That'll be my next vacation book. I get halfway through and then I start enjoying my vacation too much.
Yeah, I know how that goes.
So we got one more minute on the psychedelic topic. Is there anything in particular just about psychedelics in general that you'd like to touch on for a minute?
I guess, well, let's talk about it from a company side, kind of what we look for, obviously investing in companies like that. Our managing partner, Mike, was actually recently featured on US News for their Investing in Psychedelic Medicine article. And I think he said it best, so I'll just echo, his sentiment. I really think it's going to be an intellectual property race to develop these drugs, to be honest. It's really, from a go public standpoint, I think that's going to be the focus of the industry that we're going to see over the next several years. Obviously, there's a dozen companies that are currently already in the process, so it's going to kind of be a race to, see who gets what first and what patents are approved, and then obviously, as the gateway designation drugs start becoming more and more, granted, I guess, here in the United States and Canada, it's going to be very interesting to see what kind of the local, laws are going to shape out for some of that stuff. Denver was obviously way ahead of the curve. You look at Oakland, I think Santa Cruz or Santa Barbara. So you kind of see there are little pockets. And again, back to the Indian reservations. The Southwest tribes, they have been doing peyote rituals for hundreds of years. The government tried cracking down on a lot of that stuff in the 80s and 90s, and it just didn't fly. I mean, it was obviously part of their religion, so
Yeah,
it's impossible for them.
That away.
Yeah, exactly. So I really think the drug side, the IP side, is going to be what differentiates the companies that are going to be really special.
Yeah, fair enough. So the second topic that we'll chat about a little bit is, and we'll chat about it like a boss, don't worry. I like that mug.
Thanks. It keeps me on point.
So being sustainable like a boss, what does that mean to you? Just in general, personal life, or in the psychedelic industry?
So I guess, again, it's a layered question, right? I mean, I think, like anything, I think having a lot of different perspectives on, number one, the industry, and number two, the people running the businesses that make up that industry are really going to be what separates sustainability from someone looking purely from a monetary perspective. I think that there are a lot of people out there that are looking at this industry not from a health perspective, but more as a way to make financial, profits. I mean, unfortunately, it's just the realistic of the society that we live in today.
Any industry, any business ever.
Exactly. So I think having, I think having a team, number one, that has some form of connection to the industry, whether it's having a family member that's dealt with, opiate addiction, or a family member that's dealt with alcoholism, or whatever the case may be, incarceration from drugs. I think that there is going to be a real shift, kind of what happened to the cannabis industry in 2015, 16, 17, where you had everybody and their mother racing into the business that had no experience, no personal connection to the business. I think that the psychedelics industry is very unique, just from the perspective that it seems like most of the people involved right now all have very personal connections to the business. So I think from the sustainability side, I think the more emotional connection that you have to the business, I think the longer you're going to be successful in the business, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, it drives back to like Simon Winnick's principle of it starts with why, right? When you feel more connected to what you're doing, you're definitely gonna, give a little bit more of a shit, and it shows in your results, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it's funny, man, because if you look back throughout the last 50, 60 years, Time Magazine in like 55 or 57, I forgot what year, I mean, it was in the late 50s, was doing articles on psychedelics. People were traveling down to Mexico, to take psychedelics and have religious experiences.
Yeah, the cat almost got out of the bag into mainstream.
Yeah, man. So it's really, the sustainability of the industry, I guess. So another layer to that question is, from a media standpoint, is, people like you, it's very important to get the message out there from people, again, that have a connection to the industry, that can not only speak intelligently on the topics, but also from the mental health side, like we were talking about.
And a value set, right? Like they've got this solid moral foundation to, make a business that actually is here for the long term and to help people, and not just, get absorbed by big pharma and go back to the bottom line, right?
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see over the next, 3 to 5 years exactly who's in the business for what types of reasons. So you're starting to see some of these, $500 million, $1 billion, $1.5 billion valuations on some of these companies. So
and so do you think that's sustainable? Like, do you think we're going to see, you touched earlier on, I guess the saturation of new entrants into the industry that maybe didn't know so much about the fundamentals of business or operating or anything like that. Do you think it's going to be similar in psychedelics, where you have, a bunch of people, everything gets inflated and hyped up, and then reality sets in and you have this kind of, year, 2, 3 year long correction?
We've talked about this extensively. Mike is very connected, our managing partner, into the industry personally, obviously in business, and our senior analyst is, I would say one of the best in the entire world at kind of predicting trends. And I really, really believe that because this is a smaller niche market, where there were so many different verticals inside of the cannabis and hemp space that I think that this is going to be different.
Just because there are fewer options, I guess, of how you're going to operate in the space, right? You're either going to develop a drug, or
exactly,
be a supplier, or, you know, a clinic, right? There's tech.
Yeah, and listen, you're not, the cannabis and hemp space was so strange, man. I mean, we've seen probably over 500 companies in a 3.5-4 year period. And I mean, it was everything. I've seen cannabis potato chips and microchips built for the cannabis industry. So, I mean, it was everything in between. It was lights and soils and
it's like how much of that is actually specific to cannabis, I guess, right?
That's exactly it.
Are you building yourself into something sustainable there, or are you trying to capitalize on?
I think that's exactly what it was. There was a lot of ancillary businesses that got kind of roped into the cannabis business.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Got addicted to the premium.
And again, that's kind of where the IP race on some of the compounds come from. You know, I really feel like this is truly more of a biotech or pharmacology, you know, industry, as opposed to a recreational, you know, usage kind of industry, if that makes.
For sure, yeah. And I think, I mean, even to touch on that a little further, like in terms of the medical efficacy and applications of medical cannabis versus any medical psychedelic, like what do you see the difference being there?
You kind of seen in the beginning of cannabis, it was, you know, and listen, this is exactly how the industry blossomed, because you kind of seen it was 100% directed towards medical use in the beginning.
Right.
You know, California.
That's how you get it to happen, right?
Exactly. So it was kind of like the foot in the door. California is a very unique situation. The AIDS epidemic happened, really blew up, caused a lot of pain and suffering for a lot of different people. The cancer, you know, wave, I guess you could call it, really started to take off at that time. So cannabis kind of seemed like you had two diseases that were robbing people of happiness, health, you know, their desire to eat, and luckily cannabis helped with all of those different things. So, you know, you kind of seen the public acceptance once they knew that it was used as, you know, medical treatment. Almost instantaneously, the country flipped a switch, and, you know, the acceptance.
Well, because how can you say no to something that makes somebody feel better when they're suffering? It's the, you know, it's the same way that MAPS has really, you know, fundamentally got MDMA through the FDA. Is like, how could you say no to a veteran that this helps?
You know, and Rick, I mean, I've had multiple conversations with him. Obviously, I've listened to several of your guys' recordings, you know, through some of the Psychedelic Capital conferences, and our managing partner, Mike, has spoken with him multiple times. He's had a very, very, very unique insight. Number one, he's coming at this specifically from the medical standpoint, like we talked about. Number two, he comes from a very strong line of entrepreneurship. He has aligned himself with some of the industry leaders, not only just in the United States, but literally across the world. So it's been a very unique situation where he's kind of been able to, you know, play maybe isn't even the right word, I guess. He's been really able to utilize the people around him, you know, to kind of perfectly align himself with what's going on, you know, in today's society. And the MDMA has obviously helped tremendously for all the things that we talked about from the mental health side. You know, you're starting to see, I mean, I forgot what the numbers were, but the explosion in antidepressants being prescribed, and they're dissociatives. You know, it really takes people away, and you're putting a Band-Aid over the problem. You're not healing the wound.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like you're just getting somebody hooked on a new supply of something every day.
That's exactly all that it is. And I mean, you know, I don't want to repeat any names, but I've talked to several psychiatrists all over the United States, and you know, a lot of these guys feel kind of helpless. I mean, they feel like they're at their end of the rope and the ability of options and treatments that they have available for some of their patients.
Yeah.
I mean, it's...
So when you present a new option that actually works, you got scientific evidence proving it's, you know, like, how do you say no?
You know, and I also think, listen, you and I have talked about this several times over the last year. We're living in the information age. it was going to be a matter of time before the information on the benefits got out. Exactly. Listen, back in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, you could keep all that stuff underneath the rug. You know what I mean? You only know what you're told.
Yeah.
So it was very easy. Yeah, it was very easy to put out a couple of hit pieces and put out a couple news articles and listen, these people are maniacs or psychos, they're crazy, and drugs are associated with all these different things that we now know aren't true. So
yeah, exactly.
We also have that very, very unique perspective of being able to instantaneously share information throughout the whole world. And you see some of obviously Jamaica, the Netherlands, Mexico. I mean, the information from these countries, if you didn't have the ability to speak to people from there, you would have no idea the treatments that have been taking place. Not only are taking place, but have been for decades. I mean, it's crazy. I know several people that went down to do ayahuasca and ibogaine treatments for drug and alcohol in the late 2000s.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this has been around for a long time. People just weren't talking about it.
Well, and now people are talking about it, right? And I mean, that kind of guides us into our, third 10-minute segment, a minute or two over, but I wasn't going to cut you off on that train of thought. It was a good one. The art of being incognito and how you harness it. So there's two definitions that Google will give you. The philosophical principle that one's existence is demonstrated by the fact that one thinks, and the intellectual process of the self or the ego. So, kind of like, what are your thoughts on that just in general? Like, how do you find in life that you live incognito or even outside of that sometimes?
So, I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. I was very, very lucky that as soon as I graduated from school, I started my first business. So, I've kind of been, I guess you could say, in the trenches, my entire adult life. I found that my ego normally takes over, and I start to become a little cloudy on decisions when I don't have the right group of people around me. Mm-hmm. So again, it kind of gets back to our early conversation. We're making sure the team that you're surrounded with, I need to have people that I can count on. So if I do catch my ego or somebody else catches my ego kind of going off, I know that I have people around me to trust to bring me back into reality. I think it's so easy, not only in business, but, kind of the business that I'm in, the public market side, the private equity side, whatever the case is. There's two very distinct groups of people. There are people that have invested tens and hundreds of millions of dollars and walk around in a pair of Levi's and a t-shirt, and you would never know the difference. Yeah. And then there are people that even to go to Starbucks have to drive their Ferrari and their Gucci loafers. And, so it's, that ego question is very, very unique, especially from my perspective, because I've seen so many different versions of ego, whether it's on a monetary side or, a knowledge side or whatever the case may be. It's interesting. And I think that this business, again, because so many people inside of the business have a unique experience with these compounds, that it doesn't seem like the ego side is there as much as it is.
That's hard. So realistically and honestly, you've worked in a lot of industries, right? You haven't been sector agnostic necessarily. The whole time, cannabis was a focus for a while, but when I first got into the industry, do you see a huge difference in the fund managers that are psychedelic specific? Or
it's incredible. It's night and day. To say we were industry agnostic would be an understatement. I've literally looked at companies across every vertical. Aerospace, defense, manufacturing, green technologies. Everything you could think of. And the cannabis space was so unique into itself, just because, like we were talking about, there were so many people that were rushing in for that green rush. Where the psychedelic space, again, you just have a more focused group of entrepreneurs and scientists and doctors and therapists and media company. It's a very personal business, I've seen a tremendous difference in the not only caliber of people inside of the industry, but also the lack of ego inside of the business. I would say that some of the CEOs, obviously, that we both know, they're probably some of the most down-to-earth people I think I've ever had the pleasure of meeting. And I meet hundreds, if not thousands of people a year.
Yeah. And they're just a little bit more real, I guess you could say.
Yeah, 100%. And again, I think that gets back to that personal connection side of things. You know what I mean?
Actually being involved in it emotionally, I guess.
Yeah, it's exactly what it is. I think because most of those people, like we said, all have a personal connection, whether it's through their schooling or family or whatever the case may be, I think it's, it's a very unique industry. And I'm really excited to see what the next couple of years are going to kind of bring, and how some of these doctors and scientists and therapists are really going to kind of move into their, a lot of these guys a couple of years ago were considered quacks and all these different, you know what I mean, horrible things. Yeah. And now these people are leading the way. I mean, you see articles on Forbes, Vice, Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia. They did a full series on psychedelics. So the more and more it moves into mainstream, it kind of feels like some of these people, the real industry leaders, are finally starting to get some of their due credit.
Yeah, hate to say a toe-to-so, but a fucking a toe-to-so.
Yeah, I'd sure say so, man. I'm sure some of those guys are probably patting themselves on their, and gals are probably patting themselves on their back right now.
You have to sometimes, right?
Yeah. Maybe not, because like we said, a lot of those people don't have egos, so.
Well, and it's like, well, you also got to make sure you celebrate the small victories here and there, right? Otherwise, what are you doing it for?
Exactly, man. If you never celebrate the wins, there's no difference between the losses.
Exactly. So speaking of wins, and like the incognito aspects of really, I guess, being a little bit more altruistic, where do you see, I guess, the big victories for society coming out of this business? If we're talking about, healthcare and, personal care, mental health, all that, like, where do you think these are going to have the most fundamental impact on the way we live, from now to maybe 10 years from now?
100% the mental health side. They said 1 in 10 people in the United States have some form of undiagnosed or diagnosed mental illness. That's absolutely, for a country of 335 million people. Yeah. A lot of people running around with a lot of different issues. And, again, it gets back to the diseases of despair, whether it's the money side, not having a job, not having a house, whatever the case may be, you're kind of seeing these things amplified. And, you got to wonder how much of it's the phones and the internet.
The attention span and the advertising. And
yeah. So, we're at a very...
And it's a compound effect of this all, right?
Exactly. And again...
Sugar,
yeah, back to like we were talking about, it's the information age. So everything's shared instantaneously.
So built to be equipped with this amount of information coming in. We're built to have maximum 100 people.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, this is too much. All of it too much.
Evolutionary trait, man. Your brain remembers the amount of people in your tribe. That's it. It's, now you have people that have thousands and thousands of quote unquote friends. It's just, I think it sets a lot of unrealistic expectations. And what really concerns me, being on the younger side, is, I have 2 younger sisters, nieces, nephews, and actually getting ready to have a young one myself. And there's going to be no blueprint in how to deal with a whole generation, multiple generations now, of kids that are going to be experiencing this their whole entire life.
Yeah, blue screen since the day you're born, right?
Yeah, so, and having your life, broadcast for the entire world, and seeing what most of the time is...
No more making mistakes. That's not allowed.
Yeah, exactly. And, the unrealistic expectations of what your house should look like, or what your car should be, or how you should look, the mental side effects of that are going to be very, very interesting to see. So I know while we were talking 5 or 10 years, it's going to be very interesting to see the next couple of decades. Kind of how, this really intertwines with that. And obviously, listen, between psilocybin and LSD, there's so many different, the ketamine stuff we were talking about, there's so many different avenues to be explored that have been blacklisted from real research being done. Yeah, I'm really, really excited from that side. And again, not only just the mental health standpoint, but like we were talking about, the drug and alcohol addictions, which have absolutely exploded across the world. I think that there is going to be a tremendous amount of positive outcomes, number one, but also number two, just the therapist standpoint of having multiple different options to prescribe
new tools in your toolkit, right?
Exactly. I mean, you would never ask a carpenter to come rebuild your house and be like, hey, listen, pick one tool to come and do the job.
You only get a hammer, bud.
Yeah, like,
tell you.
You're going to get a screwdriver or a hammer, you pick and figure it out. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
So, I'm really excited from the mental health standpoint and then the addiction standpoint, kind of to see where this is going to take us. Again, the amount of SSRIs and antidepressants that have been prescribed to people that are young children and all the way up to, 80-year-old. My grandfather, I found out months ago, was taking an antidepressant. And once I asked the doctor why, it was incredible. He didn't really have a good reason. He said he was feeling shitty one day when he came inside. So instead of asking how his diet was or how his exercise level was or how his relationships were, whatever the case may be, immediately, because he was having a bad day, they prescribed him antidepressants. I mean, it's insane.
Yeah.
So the industry as a whole is ready for a change. And I think that this is going to be leading, that next wave of alternative, therapies.
I think so too. Yeah. I'm excited to be riding this wave with you and, with all the smart people surrounding you and everyone in this industry for sure. So I appreciate you coming on today and just sort of talking.
Of course, man. I'm really looking forward to, number one, being a part of the space, and number two, watching you grow as you have and having all these different CEOs. I mean, I have to tell you, I would say, probably more than a dozen of the companies that have been on your guys' conferences and podcasts. I mean, we've invested in. So
yeah, for sure.
I think it's important for these companies to be getting on there, getting their message out, talking about, what their therapies are, or what their practices are, and who their team members are. And I think that information is important for not only investors, but the regular average Joes. I mean, I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with, people at the grocery store, the golf course, the gym, and it's incredible because everybody shares these everybody knows somebody that's had a drug or an alcohol problem or, has depression or has PTSD. So, these affect all of us as a society as a whole. I really, truly believe that the more information that's put out there, the better off the whole industry is going to be. Whether it's from I don't want to say recreational because I don't think it should be the most important thing, but just from the wide variety, of what's out there right now, the recreational side all the way up to the therapeutic side, I think it's important that all of those different things are talked about. There's nothing bad that's ever happened from information being shared with each other. So the more information that's out there for the public and for people to digest, I truly believe that people always make the best decision as long as they're presented with the best information.
That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the best information out there. That's for sure.
Yeah, man, it's made a big difference. I tell you, I've talked to a lot of different people in, my industry, the investment side of the business. And, it kind of seems to be, a lot of these, especially with Corona now, the virtual conferences have been where most people have, found out about a lot of these companies. So it's important, man. I'm really excited to watch you guys grow too. Hopefully to be taking a part in a few more of these too.
For sure. Yeah, no, I appreciate you coming on, and we'll get you on a Psychedelic Capital soon enough. And hopefully we can just keep steamrolling forward.
Yeah, man. I'm excited to see it too. Hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah, it'll be cool. It's always cool meeting people in person after knowing each other virtually for a long time.
Yeah, it's always nice.
Thanks so much, man. Appreciate it.
All right, buddy. I'll talk to you soon here.
Take care.
Bye.
Thanks for joining the Incognito series, brought to you by Microdose and the Conscious Fund. Visit our website at www.microdose.buzz.